How are you?
Good morning. Started the recording. Doing pretty well. It kind of feels like the last day of summer in that we are shifting into getting change. We are purging the house of items to get ready for a new puppy. We are getting all the kids' workspaces and schedules organized for remote learning at school. And praise God, I just found out that my in-laws have got a ticket from India, so they'll be able to come here. They've been delayed for a month or two because of everything.
Oh, wow.
So it's not a done deal till they're on the plane, but it's looking good. So, whew.
No, that's
So
encouraging.
But yeah, it definitely feels like we've been kind of coasting a bit this summer, especially in terms of parenting. And so we are ramping up. And things seem to be ramping up with the Great Reset too. So,
Yeah, but we could use a lot more guys and maybe one or two more women, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, no, not almost. I feel like we are close to having something concrete we
Yes.
can invite people towards, right? Because right now it's like, hey, join us for this really open-ended conversation about something that is really important, but is difficult to define.
Correct.
Right? And the fact that this many people have hung with us this long,
Well, that's
is
positive
really,
spin. Yes. Okay. But
really
everyone,
deeply grateful.
yeah, everyone contributes so much, so it got us to the point where we are. Agreed.
Yeah, and so I think that I'm hoping by the end of this season, we'll actually say, okay, this is the thing we're doing. This is how we're doing it. I mean, the magical word I keep pursuing is enrollment.
Right. I know what that is.
Yeah, right. Is that, because one of the challenges that we have with Christianity is that people think they are signing up for X, and then they discover, actually, they think they're signing up for Y, and they're signing up for X, for Chi, for the cross, right? And this throws people off. And I often think that the one big advantage the early church had wasn't the apostolic ministry, it wasn't Hebrew culture. It was just that everybody was keenly aware that they were signing up to die.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Jesus had died. Every few months, one of the apostles would die. Every time Paul showed up, somebody would die. And like, this was...
Yeah. It was more like a revolutionary movement is what you're telling me.
Well, we if there's one thing we have learned from church history, is that when the church is persecuted, faith blossoms. And when the church is rich, faith withers.
Well,
can you think of any counterexamples to either of those two statements?
say the condition when something blossoms.
When the church is persecuted, faith blossoms. And when the church is rich, faith withers. I mean, certainly there's
I'm not going to say it's a Christian thing per se. I think like even Buddhists and Muslims and atheists and worse will respond in that same human way.
Well, yeah, it depends on what you mean. I mean, one could argue that Islam...
I mean, there's fight or flight is
right, but I mean, one
yeah.
could argue that the purest vision of the Islamic State is as a conqueror. So Saudi Arabia with an authoritarian regime is closer to the original vision of Islam, or at least the Medina version of Islam, than so it's interesting, but let's take a more generous view. One could argue that the Meccan version of Islam, which is what you see when Muslims are a small minority in Christian nations, is more like what Islam was supposed to be, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah. Yep.
So, well, certainly, but actually, this is the other thing I was thinking about. We had these long discussions about leadership. And in my attempts to answer David Johnson's question from last time, the way that I ended up framing it was the real enemy of spirituality is hierarchy.
Yeah, that's not intuitively obvious. What do you see there? I think that's probably true. But
Yeah, so that's the
and
argument
well,
I'm trying to
I
develop.
think I'm going to relate it to the verse you sent me this morning. I think that helps look at that.
Right, the Jeremiah verse.
Great verse.
Just reading
We
it,
do
so,
we could do a whole session just on that verse with our group.
maybe, except that
No, then they're
the
not enrolled.
our group would spend too much time uh,
I know.
on, well, ironically, like they would demonstrate that verse and demonstrate the limitations of that verse quite brilliantly, and that's where it gets interesting, right? I think I should actually pull out the context a bit, because I think that might actually help us understand that. Instead, everyone will die for their own sin. Whoever, oh, that's actually worth pulling out too. Let me just zoom in on the context. That is the canonical problem with the more profound the truth, the more important it is to look at a larger context. So a simple truth like a proverb you can take out of context and it's not too bad. But the more deeper the truth, the bigger the context you go, and the really cosmic truths, you have to go all the way to the whole.
Yeah, good call. Right? You just can't pull this verse out. Good call, yeah.
And so, okay, let's start with verse 27. Maybe that's good. Let's just go and see, make it look more like we know what we're doing.
I just wanted to share a couple things before I lose the thread. So the couple things before I lose the thread, before we jump in. The reason I'm not jumping up and down agreeing with you that faith blossoms when there's persecution is that makes me sad, and for many years now I've been going in the other direction, exploring joy and shalom and things like that. So that's the background there. But I also think Barna would argue with you that I mean, it's not like churches are persecuted, but they have some pretty big virus impediments. Which
well, I think that's actually this. I think that's actually my point. Is that when there is I mean, this is generally true of human nature, right? When there's an external threat, people band together to fight it. When there is no external threat, they turn on each other. Right.
But so what I'm saying is, from a God perspective, we always have had the exact same external threat throughout eternity.
Sorry? It has not. No, actually, we've had very different. I mean, we've had the same internal threat of Satan trying to destroy us, right? But we've had very different external threats.
As far as I know, most humans have felt that they are going to die in their lifetime.
After about their 20s.
Yeah. Well, I said most.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're aware. It's in
most
there.
Adults.
It's working, and it's working in the back. But yeah. So I get it. But yeah, it's normal fight or flight, and I just think Christianity is beyond that. That's all.
Well, no, Christianity is not. Jesus is beyond that, and that's the problem.
I meant the Jesus stuff, yes.
Right. So, but this is one of the problems, right? Is that Christianity?
Okay, now we're talking. Sure, of course, Christianity is following the normal human scripts, or even worse. It's probably even worse, right? Yeah.
Right. It's a human tradition, but here's the problem, right? We can't
who cares about Christianity? We're Jesus dudes, right?
Yeah. Well, but what does it mean to be a Jesus dude, right? Because this is the tension, right?
It means sometimes I do care about Christians and try and help them when it looks like they're suffering. Yeah.
Right, and the point is that what is it? No one's quite sure who made the quote. Some people say Luther, some people say Augustine, but like
the walk, don't talk. Yeah.
No, not that one. The church is a whore, but she is our mother. Like we can't not be human. We can't not have our background and our culture, right? I mean, everything we know about Jesus comes through the church.
Yeah.
Right, and so we can't pretend.
No, certainly not. Again, now we're confusing the church or that church, right? So that's why I got lost at the beginning. You said Christianity. I equated that with Jesus dudes, but the world has spoken volumes about what the church is or isn't. It doesn't just come from Jesus. That's the problem.
Well, yeah, but the point is that like, the point is that, you know, there's a wonderful picture that this book, the Rick Joyner Final Quest series that I've been referring to periodically. He starts out where he's like in this battle with the army of God against the forces of Satan, and he's like swinging a sword and battling them. But then he climbs up the mountain, and he no longer needs to use his sword, and he starts shooting arrows, which are way more effective and far less dangerous. So he starts to think, well, maybe I don't need my sword after all. But then as he keeps climbing up, the demons, there's these vultures that come and just throw up on them and stuff. And he realizes he has to use his sword to anchor himself to the ledge, because otherwise people start slipping and falling off. And I thought about that because it really matches what I have seen about the Word of God. Like when you are starting out as a Christian, you know, at least in my tradition, all you do is study the Bible and quote Bible verses and memorize Bible verses, right?
Right.
And you focus on the verses that everyone says are important. And that's a really good thing to do. But the problem is, I don't know if you've seen this, is that you can end up just focusing on the Bible and forget about Jesus or actually obeying him.
Yeah, you start worshiping the Word, not God, yeah.
Right, yeah, and so we go through this phase. So then the next phase is like, okay, you know, looking at the static word is not the thing to do. The thing to do is actually to hear God's voice and obey him. And that's good too. But there's a point where, oh, hold on a second, I have to hear my children's voice. Yes, what is it? You finished all your work and your chores. And so the next thing to do is to, what I was thinking is we've been asking God to hear your dreams and stuff, and we haven't heard an answer to that. Why don't you just write down, spend 15 minutes of silence, just.
After that, so I don't have to come up and down the stairs every single time.
It is now 9:05 and you have an hour and a half. Have you finished reading all your dog books?
Mom's reading
Well,
I don't want to read that one.
well, you have to do something. You can read the Orson Scott Card book then. Right. Speaking of, yeah, my sons were doing a. You still there?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm very impressed. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, no, my sons, part of the giving up on the summer of self-indulgence is, actually I should say this, you know, like most of us, including me a lot of the time, my son self-medicates with entertainment, right? Is that we are really good at not listening to our own hearts and not listening to God's Spirit. Mm-hmm. And we need personal disciplines as well as relational practices to help us to stop doing what Adam did, where we hide from God in the garden he gave us. And the tragedy of modern Christianity, and probably many other forms of Christianity too, I don't want to pick on us. I mean, this is exactly what they spend all the time fighting about in the New Testament. The forms that God gave us in one season become the snares that we use to escape from the discomfort of God's presence, right? It's the golden serpent all over again.
Right.
It's like God gave us Bible study. God gave us quiet times. God gave us cathedrals. God gave us church buildings. He gave us hierarchies, right? He set up this hierarchical system of overseers and elders and deacons in the New Testament.
Okay, now this ties into your first statement about hierarchy and spirituality. Yeah.
Right. And the terrifying thing is that if we build something better, somewhere, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years from now, that will be the snare that trips everyone up. And the best.
Yeah, well, I think we're, we've had discussions, or I've tried to state, like we have to make sure the first thing we do is develop metrics to make sure we don't become institutionalized, ossified, and exactly what we're talking about.
Right, you know, you familiar with Gödel's incompleteness theorem?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, right. So the whole point is that any system you build will have a failure mode that the system cannot detect, right? So there is a certain, this has given me a great deal of empathy as I've been wrestling with this, is that look, we can do way better than those who have gone before by looking from their example, right? And we can try to build a self-correcting, self-healing system, which makes humility the top virtue, but yet still enables people to take constructive action.
Something like that. I think, you know, my main input into the process was God is not a system. So, but I understand what you mean by system. Yeah.
But yeah, the thing is, every human, well, God is, the way I put it, I mean, is this dog trying to get out? Yeah, whatever, okay. Dog's here, right? Okay, anyway, God is not a system. Well, it depends what you mean by a system, right? God is an entity who has relationships.
Yeah, right. We don't have to debate that again, but I just think this, well, here's the system. All I'm saying is our system, which I'm fine to use that word, has to have learned from prior system failures that it has to have some metrics there to know that we've gone toxic.
Right.
And
yeah,
it's a rare system that has that.
Right. You know, I think the the whole point is that the top priority of the system has to be critiquing and able to empowering people to make constructive critiques of the system.
Right. So I like that. I also really love the fact that you're saying, you know, it is kind of context dependent. So what worked 10 years ago, probably not helpful right now. And so we have to say, there's not going to be like these 10 commandments with perfect words that will get us through the next millennia, right? Or anything that has to.
Right. Yeah.
It has to be really okay. I mean, what's the best thing to do? I probably would have gotten here in 2 hours, but had some epiphany. It's like we have to be walking with God in the moment, every single moment.
Right. But the thing is that we
can't check in with God once a year at the High Temple and say, okay, we got the new set of marching orders for the next 364 days. Right now, it's ridiculous.
Let me just write this phrase down because I thought there was. And the thing is we have to, which implies creating relational structures to.
Okay, so there's the I word, and so this is straight out of the world of business. Continuous.
I word improve or.
Yeah, right. So modern business is focused on continuous improvement systems, and the church just never seemed to get.
Well, so let's be fair. Okay, I don't want to get into a dichotomy. Oh, the business world has this all figured out, and the church is just a mess.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay,
I'm not elevating the business world above.
Right, so
the kingdom, yeah.
There are people within the business world
borrowing best practices from whatever domain.
Right, yeah, there are certain practices. Yeah, I think the point. There are certain practices that the business world has been obsessing over, and what's interesting to me, the church often adopts them as well.
Yeah. Jesus CEO was a bestseller, right? New York Times bestseller.
You know, not all. Right. Yeah. And what's interesting, though, okay, this is so the first point I made is we want systems that empower people to constructively create context to improve upon the system or improve the system. But the second one is creating relational structures to ensure God Himself is stays at the center of our structures, right? And that's the paradox, is that if we just say, okay, we're going to keep God at the center, and then we don't have any habits or practices around it, we'll end up just navel gazing and getting stuck in a very self-centered vision of God. But as soon as we create structures to help us, you know, focus on scripture or love our neighbor, then there's this horrible tension between those structures and actually experiencing God. And there's this wonderful line in the Torch and the Sword, the third volume in that Final Quest series from Rick Joyner, where he says, there's nothing better than being in my presence. However, if all you have is my presence, then people will get addicted to just dwelling in the joy of the Lord, and they won't become the warriors we need to save people from the hordes of evil. And we'll have all eternity to enjoy the presence of God, and we must start and end with the presence of God. But if that's the only thing we have, we're useless.
Yeah, they're great. I mean, so I've seen it over and over again. People they go to God because of avoidant of messy human relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agree with everything you said, but I probably would not modify the word tension with horrible. I think tension is where the life is. And I've been looking at, if I go back for a PhD, it's going to be, the theory of tension. And God created a certain type of tension for unknown reasons, but we've been trained through all sorts of avenues. Tension, evil, run away. And I think the church does it even more.
Right. So let me change the word awful. Awful tension. It is a tension that is full of awe.
Well, that's good. You should be a poet or something, huh?
I am something, but
very good. Okay, this is fun.
Anyway,
yeah.
So the idea is that
the key. Well, the key is you look at the tension from God's perspective, not from the fearful human's perspective.
Right, and I think that's it is a reverent fear.
Tension is not necessarily a bad word. I mean, in the world of physics, it's not negative, right?
Well, tension is what creates movement, right?
Yeah.
And growth. It also gets to the word anti-fragile.
Right, but I think we're talking about tension that has a big element of fear inside it. Yeah.
Right, and I think that one could argue faith is the ability, one measure of faith is how much tension you can endure.
Yeah.
And if we increase our faith muscle, then God allows us to enables us to handle greater tension, which is what God needs to do to take us from where we are to where He wants us to be.
Yeah. And by the way, so I've told you I'm trying to be more focused on the joy and shalom stuff. Mm-hmm. Personally, in my life, I haven't had life and death tension or health tensions. Very fortunate. Never been in the hospital. That's not normal. But I've had astounding tensions that are more in the, wow, this is just an incredible thing that's happening. Or wow, this relationship, never expected that. And I struggle with that. I don't want to say more than if I was, in great pain. But again, for me, tension is not a negative anymore.
Yeah, and I think the picture that one of the definitions of joy, I think this is C.S. Lewis, is joy is precisely the tension between the beautiful future we can envision or believe in and it's the deep longing we have for that in the reality that we don't have it yet.
Yeah. So I definitely self-medicate with those situations, but it's there for Christians who kind of got a taste of the kingdom, right? And then they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, but it's interesting. There is a joy that we have because the fulfillment is not here yet, which is in some ways a deeper and richer joy than we will have in heaven when it's all been fulfilled. I mean, even in heaven, I think there's still levels of longing and seeing and not there yet. So maybe that's overstating.
Well, this is a monster theme in the big reading group I've been in all summer. It's the Lacanian theory that once you get the object of your desire, that's not really a good.
Yeah, the anticipating pleasure is better than pleasure itself. Yeah,
then you shift into melancholy, and then you have no more drive and desire. And,
right.
But God's always going to raise the bar way above whatever point we.
And that's sometimes why you need faith, right? Because one of the failure was they talk about in design. I think we've talked about game design before. How in order to design a game, you need a couple of things. One of the things you need is the vision of a glorious future. But the interesting insight from game design is that a glorious future.
World of Warcraft doesn't seem to support that thesis. But okay.
Well, wait for it, right? One thing you need is that there has to be a sense. Well, no, we're like there is a glorious future that if you put in this grind, your personal glory will increase.
Okay.
Right. So there is a picture of a glorious.
Yeah, I guess if I kill all the bad guys, then it's a glorious future. I get it.
But yeah, but what's interesting though, I mean, but traditional, multiplayer
Not
games with other humans is a different. Let's set that.
That's what I meant. First
moment.
shooter games. I didn't mean World of Warcraft, which
but
has lots of.
Massively multiplayer games are different. Let's set that aside for a moment. We'll get back to that. But like a traditional single-player game,
Analyzing.
Going through.
Have you done this? Have you done the analysis of Church from a multiplayer game perspective?
Wait, give me a moment. Let me finish this analogy first.
I'm desiring the tensions here. You got me.
Okay. Live with the tension. Okay. So traditional game, single player game, you have this future you're moving towards. And you want to be a glorious future. The surprising insight is that the more glorious the future increases the disincentive to act. Because if you have this glorious picture of the future you can contemplate, you know that the reality of it will fall short.
Yeah.
And therefore, contemplating how great it's going to be is preferable to actually acting towards achieving it. And so in order to achieve forward progress, in addition to the glorious future, you have to have the ticking time bomb, right? The princess being lowered into the vat into the pot or whatever in Donkey Kong, right? And so one of the traps we fall into, especially in the church, and me for that matter, is we focus so much on the glorious future, we lose sight of the ticking clock, and therefore we end up stuck in this world where we don't have that tension, which is actually why I'm really excited about having these seasons for the Great Reset. Because I feel like, okay, we're in session 5 of this season. I got to bring us to a conclusion of some sort by episode 7, so we can move on to the next season. And it's a really useful mental trick.
We just need So we are borrowing from the modern Netflix metaphor, which probably is traced back to Jewish liturgical cycles. But we just need cooler soundtrack music, and we're there. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been working on the soundtrack a bit. I've been mostly doing the King and Country soundtrack this season. Different seasons, it's interesting how different seasons have different soundtracks. The first one, when I did my first startup, was Hawk Nelson. The second one, when I was going through my The Valley of Troubles, was actually Billy Joel, was my soundtrack for that season.
Cool.
I
do a different song each week with my therapist. I just say, this was my week, and we just spend 3 minutes listening to a song.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So let me just go back to the game thing. I get it.
Yeah.
Since I'm not a gamer, I left gaming. The height of my gaming was, I don't know, really old days. Some CRT is like space missile thing. It was the first. You remember that one? It was at the university setting. It's just like it's like, wow, look, there's a little dot moving across this CRT thing called a CRT round screen. Like you're shooting space. And then I really walked at the height of my skill.
Like Missile Command?
It's like
you have the bunkers and you're shooting up the 3 different.
I don't know. It was this 1970, early 70s, right? It's a multi-million-dollar. And then I swear the height of my skill set was Pong. So, but I hear what you're saying. The game I did play, which was get a good grade in high school. So that's why I was a procrastinator, because I thought getting that A is going to be like the most astounding thing. And I would work through Christmas holidays, New Year's holidays to just polish and get that perfect paper done, because I thought, yes, this was the outcome. And if I was like the other kids, it's like, who cares? It's high school, just turn the stupid paper.
Right. We all pick different status games that align with our capabilities, identities, and peer group. So anyway, let me work our way to some of the multiplayer games. The second kind of game that's worth studying is cooperative games. Right. Yeah. So most games traditionally have been competitive, zero-sum games.
Right.
But I think it was There was some alien game, which was a
Well,
cooperative
I mean,
game.
the example we know is the ethics bowl.
Yeah, but the ethics bowl is weird that way because it has a cooperative and a competitive. It is still zero sum in the end, but there's a cooperative element to it. But there's more traditional cooperative games out now. Pandemic is the most popular one. But the idea in a cooperative game, strictly defined, is you're trying to beat the system. And so you're all cooperating to, like solitaire actually can be seen a little bit like that, in that you're trying to solve the puzzle before time runs out. And there's cooperative solitaire games like that. And there's different other games like that. But what's interesting is, so there's a whole theory now about cooperative game design because it's a big business. There's a book called Meeples Together that talks about it.
Wait, say that again. Say the title again.
Meeples Together, Meeples, which I think is the German word for those little figures.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What's fascinating about it is that when you're designing a cooperative game, one of the most important things you have to do is sabotage perfect cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the best ways to do that is to give players a pawn that only they can move. Because otherwise what happens is you turn into a committee where you're all deciding what everyone's going to do. And the strongest voices tend to dominate it. And so by saying, so someone can say, well, I know everyone thinks I should do X, but I'm going to do Y because that's what I want to do and it's my pawn, is essential. And just reading this book gave me so much insight into how God designed humanity, right? Because God did not want a world of perfect cooperation where we just turn into this hive mind. He actually wanted us to have individual stakes. And that there is this tension, and it's a severe one, between personal glory and social good. And I think the message of the gospel, we've talked about this, is not that we need to sacrifice our personal glory for the common good, although that is a message. It's not that we need to sacrifice relational unity for the personal call to follow Jesus, though that is also a message. I think it's the message that both personal glory and relational unity are supposed to be tools that we hold in tension to push us to follow Jesus.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Heretical, but very good. Yeah. And so like the other simpler way I explain this is I call it the Christian door paradox. It's like two Christians are leaving church and like you and I, and like there's a door. It's like, I'm going to open the door so Ernie can go through. And Ernie says, no, I'm going to open the door so Bill can go through. And we just sit there and die.
The Alphonse and Gaston. Yeah, is that someone, I think there was the philosopher's ass or the donkey if you place a donkey between two piles of food and he's equally hungry, he'll be unable to decide between them. But of course, that never happens in real life. It only happens in mathematics.
But what I'm talking about, the number one tension I see in the Christian mind, whatever version Christian is, do I favor me or do I favor the other? And so I've how I've solved that nasty thing. I've had to really deep dive into looking into modern theories and critiques of self and other. And that divide needs to be severely questioned.
Yeah, and the thing is that the tension between self and other, or self and not self.
Well, no, I mean, I can't even say this is what self means, and I'm looking at a lot more commonality. Yeah.
Well, like I said, it's a really weird thing because it gets fractal really quickly, where I see myself and the other and myself, and then does these terms even mean anything anymore? And yet it does. Because, and I know, the reason I know it does is when I get it wrong, really bad things happen, right? When I start othering people and denying that they are like me, or when I blur the boundaries and forget that other people are me.
Anyways, I have a system that works in every single situation.
Ah.
You want to hear it? Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
I have less knowledge of past, present, future then God. So the system that works is ask God who should open the door.
Yeah, I think that is the, then you get into the halting problem is, okay, how do I know I've heard God correctly?
Well, that's what we started with. And that's the number one issue. I keep texting this. That's every single Christian conversation that gets serious degenerates into, yeah, but how do we know the will of God? And the church has never helped me with that.
Okay, well, good, great. So that's the, okay, so this is a good insight, right? The point of Christian relational practices is purely to help us.
Yeah, but obviously
all
there's
know
there's the word, there's other things, but
right, but I think the point is that historically we have literally gone to school on personal spiritual practices.
oh yeah,
Reading the Bible,
you don't
or
have to say that to me.
one-way, I'll call it one-way spiritual practices, right?
Now we're going like Ken Wilbury here. Yeah.
Right, and so the okay, this is where we get into your question about multiplayer online role-playing games, more plays or multiplayer games, right? Because we have designed Christianity as either a single-player game that you do with you and your Bible in your cell,
and the goal is you get to heaven, right? Something like that,
right? Or, well, different goals, but yeah, it's really about you playing it against, you know, God in your cell. Or we've done it as you're playing with a dungeon master, right? You got a guy who's setting up the rule against you, and he's sort of on your side and trying to mess with you, but sort of trying to mess with you, and you're playing this game. So school is a dungeon master type game.
Yeah, and can I just add some color? So I'm sitting in the park yesterday with David and the guy he's taking care of, and David's, you know, asking advice what to do. And it's like, well, you know, one traditional route for a Christian is you talk to the pastor. And then this, again, another epiphany is, you know, the system's not set up properly because the last thing the pastor wants to do is to lose his job, i.e. to teach you how to hear from God directly.
Yeah.
It was so crystal clear, crystal clear. It's like, yeah.
Right, and the thing is that, and let's not forget that, and you know, it's easy to blame Constantine, but as far as I can tell, this happened in the 1st century, you know, long before Constantine, is that somehow or other, I think I'm going to blame it on the Gnostics, that the bishops decided that they're the ones who get to decide who has communion. And they actually weakened it a little bit later so that the local deacons also became considered priests. But somehow there was a fear, and you know, it makes me wonder if the whole Gnostic thing was a satanic feint. He actually wasn't seriously, I mean, he wouldn't have minded, but he wasn't seriously thinking that he would be able to displace apostolic, you know, Christianity the way Paul and Peter practiced it with this Gnostic cult. But he created this terrifying fear that if the bishops didn't keep control, that people would just forget who Jesus was and fall prey to all these secret learnings. And you know, but that fear is endemic to everything we know of as Christianity, is that the fear of wrong doctrine. And you know, it's a understandable one because it is easy to see all the toxicity that happens when there is no accountability. It's much harder to see the toxicity that happens when you have top-down accountability, right? Because we're almost trained not to see it. So the alternative.
Well, I mean, the other cliche is, you know, the victors get to write the history.
Right. But you know, the losers lost, so they're not really good great role models either. Right, is that all the other things, and you know, the reality is, you know, God designed this world for better and worse, that more cohesive, decisive communities outcompete the others. That's the way the game is set up.
Yeah. Can I share my favorite verse, which shatters through all of this stuff?
Sure.
It's a verse it's, you know, Okay. I keep saying, here's the verse I never see done or taught in church, but here's the one that really,
We're gonna preach it
really,
now, and we'll find out whether you're true.
yeah.
You're
And this
right.
one really, really tears me apart because it involves hurting people. The weaker part of the body deserves the greater honor. So I would want to add that to our system.
Yes. Let's pull that one for a second. More of this reference.
And again, right, we can't just quote these verses.
Give me the reference.
1 Corinthians, Paul's talk about the body. And I don't know which chapter that is.
All right. That's why even you can't remember the verse. That's why no one preaches it.
Well, I know not to talk about that one because that's a non-starter. It's like,
Come
but
on.
wait, what does that mean? You mean you?
Well, I finally let you talk about it, and you're not ready to talk about it. Come on.
No, I mean that's I get crucified every time. It's like, what are you saying? We should fire the pastor and let the handicapped person,
No, hold on.
be on stage, right?
No,
yeah.
I've heard people preach on this. But
sure they preach on it, but what do they do about it?
Well, yeah, but you're complaining that nobody preaches about it, and the point is, well, actually they do, but that doesn't really solve the problem either. So let's be more precise.
Okay. Oh, I bet if I listen to the audio, it would be they preach upon it, but they resolve the tension so people don't go home.
Well, that's pretty much every sermon, right?
Yes.
Very few pastors have ever seen a role model for how to teach on something where you leave the tension open. And it happens occasionally. And actually, one of the great things about COVID-19 is our church has moved to a model where we spend about 20 minutes on a message, and then we spend 30 minutes in breakout rooms wrestling with it. And so the pastors suddenly have this freedom to say, hey, this is a really important question. I don't have an answer. You guys go in your breakout rooms and wrestle with it, right? And it's a really, and because we have a team pastoring model, they're not nearly as stressed about their jobs as.
Well, thank you. Maybe now I know why the Barna number is happening, because they don't like that struggle.
Well, I think most churches, frankly, and by volume, right? Most churches are small. Most Christians attend a large church, right? Because of the power law distribution. And so because of that, most Christians are in churches that are too large to use Zoom interactively. They have to do a broadcast streaming.
Right. I've noticed this, right? The small churches are kicking butt. Yeah.
Right. Well,
with the new interaction, with the new interaction that's supported. Yeah.
Okay. So let's. So
well,
rather than complaining about nobody preaching this verse, let's preach the verse
in the way that Paul intended it. So
as best you can, just do it. Go for it.
So the problem with this verse is people. I mean, on the face of it, Christians and many other nice people say this sounds nice. Yes, we should help needy people, but Paul is after something much greater than that. So you probably wouldn't see this in a high-powered, high-tech company. And so the goals are very different. So the preaching message would be, okay, so the context of where did this come from? Paul just didn't say this to get empathy, like, see, I'm a nice guy, peacock feathers, I care for needy people, right? It's like there's some really deep theological truth in why he has this crazy idea for a system. And that's all I can say. You can take a crack at it, but it's a sort of thing where you just have, it's like a koan, you have to sit there and it's like, why would the weakest deserve the greater honor? It's so counterintuitive.
Right. And of course,
so you question what is weakest. You question weakest, right? What does weakest mean?
Right. So think about the unpresentable parts. That I think is probably the most poignant. It's like the parts that are central to our identity and our future, and our gender are the parts that we keep covered.
Back to the fig leaf, perhaps.
Yeah. And also, those are the parts that are the most actually. In the body, it's easier to see. The parts that are most sensitive are the ones that we sort of act like we're ashamed of, but in some way you can think of, we're also treating them with the greatest honor by protecting them. And there's kind of that tension.
We ourselves, right? The person, yeah.
Right, so we'll start with that, start with the organic metaphor that he's working with and try to avoid getting too crude so we keep our PG rating.
No, what you said was just an individual thing in some sense. This verse is talking about the body, how we relate to someone who has something dishonorable.
No. But I want to start with the core metaphor of how do we relate to our own physical bodies.
Yeah, I got that.
Right, and I think the interesting thing is that, okay, so the things that we're most embarrassed by are also the things we value the most.
Yeah.
It's where our greatest pleasure and our greatest pain are, because they're the most sensitive. So from a systems perspective, this is what you would call a weak signal or a soft signal.
Yeah. Frankly, all you're saying, frankly, all you're saying is the squeaky wheel gets the grease or the oil, right?
So that's one way of looking at it. But a more interesting perspective is I heard a story about a school for the deaf, where an architect was hired to build a building that really represented how that was really designed to make it a really pleasant experience for deaf people. And one of the things he quickly realized, he wasn't deaf himself, he just did a lot of anthropological research like a good designer does. And maybe we'll wrap up on this because we're getting close to the end of our time.
Yeah.
10 minutes. But what he said was that.
What did you do? Yeah, I'm curious.
So what he did was that vision is vastly more important for deaf people than it is for sighted people, because they have to look at each other when they're conversing and interacting. In fact, there's often a pattern where one person is walking backwards while the other person's walking forward so that they can see each other. And so the person and walking that way has to kind of spot for the other person. And it means if there's interruptions like a pillar, talking people can just walk around it and keep going, but people who are signing have to watch more carefully. And so then and the other thing is that they're using their eyes all the time. And so lighting is hugely important, because if it's too bright, you get glare and eye fatigue, and if it's too soft, you get eye strain, and all these things. So when he thought about that, he designed this place that was designed to be as comfortable as possible for deaf people to interact relationally within that space while they're doing other things, which is just a heck of a metaphor for what we're trying to do with the great reset.
That's heck of it. It's great.
But here's the fascinating thing. He said, and this made this place way better to live in for deaf people and also the rest of us, right? Accessible design works best when you focus on the people who are the weakest, because they experience the friction in the system way more than everyone else. And so they're consciously pained by it, while the rest of us are degraded and traumatized by it just below the level of conscious perception.
Yeah, that's very good. I agree.
That's would be my answer of why we need to obsess about what the weakest members of the body are feeling.
Yeah, you're saying it's a win-win.
They're the canaries in the coal mine. It's a cooperative multiplayer game. That's win-win. Right, and when you're exploring an unknown situation with ill-defined dangers, you actually, it literally is the canary.
You better pay attention to that canary, yes.
He who loves the most canaries wins. Right? Or he who loves the most canaries learns the fastest.
Yeah. Right?
And I think, but it's in the tension with the offices, or the spiritual, the fivefold gifts or whatever.
Yeah. Nevertheless, it's not really fair to the canaries. They're being used. Yeah. It's not really fair to say I have the canary's best interest in mind. They're being used by me. They're objectified. But yeah.
Well, the thing is that there's a cycle here, right? Because if you grab a canary who's supposed to be living in the rainforest and you stick him in a coal mine, that's harsh, right? And
he dies from gas, yeah, to save me.
Well, what you want, of course, is that if you have good canary empathy,
We have to play the Sting Canary in the Coal Mine song as our soundtrack here, yeah.
Right. You know, so maybe there's a better metaphor than canaries, right? But it's the here's the thing, right? If you know reality sufficiently well, then people who complain are, and like, you know, like if you're trying to,
Oh, you mean like Black Lives Matter people complain, right?
Right, exactly. This is precisely the tension, right? If the system, let me choose a less emotionally loaded, like if you're trying to build a bridge across a river, okay, and you're the engineer who understands exactly the stresses and the strains, because you've done it before and you've calculated it out, then you don't need people second guessing you and complaining and whining. You need them to just get off their butts and put a plank in the right place to build things. Because you have, if the system as we know it works well for this context, it's really better for people to stop questioning and complaining and
right.
You know, just build.
But you'll never make progress towards self-driving flying cars and trucks.
Right, so that's the question is, right, so there's two different modes that are worth thinking about. One is when you have a known context with a known problem and a well-known problem and a well-known solution. In that case, the person who's done it before should really be listened to. The other situation is when you're in an unknown context with an ill-defined problem and no good solution. And in that context, you need to obsess over the weak signals. And here's the, this is a fun place to end on. There's a wonderful paper that was written in the 1960s, I think, called Artificial Intelligence is No Match for Natural Stupidity.
Oh, good.
And the way I interpreted that was, we are all naturally stupid when confronted by a new problem. And worse, determining when an old problem ends and turns into a new problem is itself a new problem.
Yeah, I mean, AI, machine learning, is basically just developing, you know, it's pattern recognition.
And it's pattern recognition on existing problems that we have solved.
Right, right. It works.
Or that we know what the solution looks like.
Yeah, right.
Right?
But if the playing field changes, do you know what happened? Do you know why there's a toilet paper crisis? Because all the algorithms that were controlling the supply chain didn't function during the start of the lockdown. I read that. It's like a great example of, don't worship machine learning because it can't even get toilet paper demand properly.
We period, don't worship learning, period. Because everything you have learned is about the past, by definition.
Right.
Right, human learning,
no, I mean, just people, I mean, people still think school's good, but people think machine learning is our salvation. So it's just to throw some cold water on that.
Well, to be fair, most of the people, a lot of the people who hate the factory model of schooling love machine learning and think it's the future. But as Kriya Christensen said, the problem with data is that it's only about the past, right? And here's the tension, right? If we ignore learning, we make the same stupid mistakes over and over again.
Yep.
If we worship learning, we make the same intelligent mistakes over and over and over again, right? And this is the tension of, give me a moment here, because I feel like there's something profound that I have not thought yet that I need to think. Oh yeah, this was the word I got from Rick Joyner's Prophecy and the Torch and the Sword. You must teach people, but the most important thing you must teach them is teach them to learn. And the way you do that is by them seeing you learn from them. Teaching is ultimately learning, learning is ultimately teaching. And that's the non-hierarchical resolution.
I mean, I just smell Romans 15:14 all over that. But I've said that the most important thing that you're supposed to take away from college is that you've learned how to learn.
Right, that was supposedly was it. But here's the thing, actually, and I think this is where Romans 15:14 can easily be misconstrued. Is it's written as, you must all teach one another. But the implication, which we forget, especially people like me or our group where we're so busy talking over each other, we're trying to teach each other, is that we all need to be learning together how to learn from each other. If we can do that, then no power in hell can stop us.
Teaching and learning are like this, yes.
Symmetric teaching learning. Yeah. Learning symmetrically, and you want to have a dynamically balanced network.
It takes two to fight, it takes two to learn. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that where we are always trying to find better people to learn from, and particularly those who are the most sensitive, and often the lesson that we need to learn the most comes from the person that we would least expect to be able to learn from. And in fact, where we have the greatest filters that tell us to not waste our time with them.
It happened to me last weekend in spades, yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I love David Johnson so much on The Great Reset, is because he says things that make no sense to me and I find incredibly annoying, but I've learned that's probably the most valuable thing that I need to hear, is precisely that. And it's so, unfortunately, now that I've learned that, I'm probably also ignoring something else that's even more valuable that I'm still filtering out. And that's why we need to be members of a body where we keep having scripture and the Holy Spirit pounded into our head. Honor the weakest, cherish what you most want to push away, because that is where you will finally hear the thing that I've been screaming in your ears, that you've been deliberately and forcefully tuning me out.
Okay, so you don't want to use the Black Lives example, but
no, we can go there now. I just wanted to
no. I think the other one that people cherish even more is the Mother Teresa example
of the week. Yeah, but Black Lives Matter, I think, is the
no, I mean,
she says, really great example.
She says that's where I found God. That's where I see God.
Yeah, in the week, in the least of these. Yeah, I mean, Black Lives Matter is a great example until it becomes the system, right? Because there are people who are so enamored of Black Lives Matter.
Give it a chance. Don't give it a chance. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, I'm not saying there's any problem with Black Lives Matter, right? It's precisely that it is how people use it.
Well,
right?
I mean, humbly, I don't even know what it is or isn't. It's a very complex thing. That's all I know. Right,
and that's fine, right? And we're having a moment which is great, right? The challenge with Black Lives Matter and everything else is that, or the opportunity, right? Is that.
Oh, see, now we're back to that game, that super high possible, goal, right?
Right, and I think that is why it's interesting. Like, a lot of this stuff, secular people get and understand, and practice in many cases better than Christians do. And occasionally I ask myself, like, what benefit is there to being a Christian or to knowing Jesus, given that, those advantages seem to have availed us so little. But here's where I think it actually pays off, is that we have a role model in Jesus, and we have an ontological expectation that there is something in the universe that loves me more than I love myself. And someone who can be known and who actually wants to be known. And that relational possibility is the thing that ought to be pulling us to embrace greater tension, greater hope, and to blow past our glorious perceived futures, because we know that whatever God has for us is actually even way better than that. And so if we can actually start living that out, then we will actually have something that the world will say, hey, that's a best practice for getting what I care most about that I'm not seeing anywhere else. Maybe I should check these Jesus people out. Oh, Lord. All right. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, thanks. These are great things to think about.
Yeah.
Got a lot of good images. A lot of good images. Yeah.
Symmetric teaching.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, thanks for your time this morning, and
all right,
go push that little genius some more.
All right. God bless you, Bill.
God bless. Thanks.
All right. And end the end for now.